Next time you're on YouTube, check out our Point of the Spear YouTube channel. We've got bonus video material from the podcast plus tons of military history videos, including full-length documentaries. It's a great way to spend some time, and don't forget to subscribe while you're there. And click the bell icon so you'll be notified of all the great weekly videos we're uploading.
As I don't know, there's this romanticized idea I had in my head of the Cold War and what it was like to spy. But back then, the spy craft was still, it was devoid of all the gadgets and everything that you have today. I really wanted to tell some stories about that, but it was like, these were real stories and real people that were trying to figure out how do we get information and, translate that into intelligence that can help us stop the Russians from doing whatever we think they're going to be doing.
An excerpt from today's guest, speaking about his multi-volume Cold War spy series, featuring main character Ed Maddox. Best-selling author R.J. Patterson is here, and I'll speak with him about spying on the Russians, among other things, right after this break. I'm Robert Child, and this is Point of the Spear. March 25th is National Medal of Honor Day, and my new book, Immortal Valor, about the Black Medal of Honor recipients of World War II, is out now. The book chronicles these immortal heroes' life journeys through all the pain and struggle up until their ultimate triumph. I hope you check out Immortal Valor, which is on sale now as we celebrate all Medal of Honor recipients on March 25th. Welcome back. Today's guest grew up in a military family, but spent much of his career in journalism, winning numerous awards, writing articles for prestigious newspapers, including the New York Times. He's been a prolific and best-selling author for many years, and today we're speaking about his 5-book Cold War spy series. Author R.J. Patterson joins us now. R.J., welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Rob. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome. Now, I understand you're from a military family, but you didn't take that track, but you're writing essentially military thrillers.
Yeah, my dad flew A-10s, and my brother, he flew as well, KC-135s, and my sister was in J-Stars, and even her husband was in the military. So everybody was in this world, and I was interested in it. I just wasn't interested in being a part of it, if that makes any sense. A lot of times, at least when I would first come back after everybody had kind of gone out and we were in our early 20s and we would meet back up for Christmas or Thanksgiving and have family discussions, everybody would start talking in alphabet soup, and I had no idea what this meant or that acronym meant or anything. And so, but I was very much interested in what they were saying and what they were talking about. And so that was always fun for me. And I had never, really pursued it because I don't know, it just wasn't my wasn't my thing. I took ROTC classes when I was in college because of my interest in it, but it was more in a kind of an educational perspective, not necessarily I want to do this. There was a time when I thought about being a journalist in the Air Force, but overall, I was more drawn towards some other things and kind of went in that direction. And so, but I still had, very much a love for the military and a lot of respect for the military family. I mean, my grandfather was part of he drove a tank that stormed the beaches at Normandy, one of the amphibious tanks. I mean, they were part of, my whole family just been a part of that for a long time. So very interesting to me, about what goes into, decision-making in the military and spycraft stuff, the whole, picture of it to me has always been interesting. And so I've dug in that way. And as a writer, look for ways to tell stories about that.
Now, we talked offline, you spent time as a sports writer. What took you in this direction of writing thriller novels from that background?
Well, as I was into sports, I got to do pretty much everything that I ever wanted to do as a sports writer. I've covered the World Series, I've covered Olympics, covered Super Bowl, covered Final Four. I mean, just any premier event I was able to be a part of as I was writing. And when as I started, there was a point where probably about after 10 years of doing that, where I started reading again. I had been to college and was forced to read things that wasn't necessarily my interest. And one day I got on a plane and I was flying to Portland, Maine. And as I was in the airport, I was like, I'm just going to read a book. Like, I don't want to do anything else. I mean, this is before they had, I didn't really care to watch the movies on the screen or whatever. It was back in the day where you had one choice, whatever they put up there. And I was like, I'm just going to read a book. And so I grabbed a Jack Reacher novel and started reading it. And what was interesting is it took place, I believe the book was called The Persuader, and it took place in Portland, Maine, on the place where I was going to. So I'm reading this novel going, I'm about to be here. And I'm like kind of imagining what it's going to be like. And then I get in the car and drive up the road. And I'm like, this is exactly where this guy shot this guy. And I'm going back and forth. And I'm like, it's kind of sparked something in me again of like, there's more to, like, I love telling stories that are around the world of sports, but there's also other stories that are fun to tell too. And, as I was growing up, my dad had always, told me these cliffhanger stories when I was a kid, right before bedtime, just made up stories. And every night I wanted to know what happened. And so there was part of me that was kind of conditioned to tell stories that way. And the sports stuff had kind of grown a little bit stale for me. And it kind of sparked this interest. And I was like, what if I put these two things together and, was able to kind of merge the storytelling that I'd learned with, some of the knowledge that I had about military and spycraft and things like that I was interested in. So that's kind of how it started for me.
It sounds like serendipity, picking up a book about Portland, Maine, and you're traveling there. That doesn't sound like coincidence.
Yeah, I mean, when I did it, I was like, I got done and I was like, this is really like bizarre to me. It was like kind of jarring. And, I'd called my girlfriend at the time, who later became my wife. And I was like, you won't believe this, and she was like, well, you ought to look into that, pursue this or whatever. And so that's kind of like started my journey. And I mean, I don't feel like it was just a random thing, even as random as it did seem. It was like, what are the chances of this happening? So.
Yeah, no, that was definitely a signpost there.
Yeah.
We're talking about your Cold War series now, the Ed Maddox series. That was a dangerous time in this country, and the stakes were really high. Is that what drew you to doing this series with your main character, Ed Maddox?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you this. I was a kid that grew up, in the 80s, kind of with the Cold War still there, in the Reagan administration. And I remember watching a made-for-TV series. I don't know if any of your listeners would remember this, but it was called America, and the K was backwards. And it was this kind of, mini series on ABC that they did that kind of told the story of alternate history. Like, what if the Russians had won and taken over the United States? And so it was kind of telling the story from that perspective. I think Chris Christopherson was in it. There were some big names that were in it at the time. I was just a kid, and I remember watching that and going, wow, like, what would happen? Like, there's so many weird things, that one that went one way or the other, that kind of swung the war or even swung the Cold War. And that was even actually before the time that the Iron Curtain had fallen, or at the wall in Berlin or whatever. And so I was, I kind of grown up that way, thinking about it. And as I don't know, there's this romanticized idea I had in my head of the Cold War and what it was like to spy. But back then, the spycraft was still, it was devoid of all the gadgets and everything that you have today. And I really wanted to tell some stories about that. And, kind of got into reading and learning about what happened during that time period. Like what were CIA agents doing, and how are we spying on the Russians, and what did that look like? And I found it fascinating. I thought it was, more than just, something that I'd seen in a movie or whatever, but it was like, these were real stories and real people that were, learning this, trying to figure out how do we get information and, translate that into intelligence that can help us stop the Russians from doing whatever we think they're going to be doing. And so I, from a cerebral point, I thought that was really a lot of fun. And would make a great platform for telling stories.
And you did a lot of archival research on the CIA in Washington on this series, didn't you?
Yes, I did. I have a friend who works in special projects there, and he's called me up several times. Like he gets stuff before anybody else does. he's in there kind of redacting things, looking at it, getting it all in shape, before they put it out into the public. And so he called me up and he was like, you've got to come up here and look at this. And the CIA papers that I read they're the only operational papers that are available to the public, still from back in the day. Wow. And they were kind of tucked away inside the Nazi war crime papers. So they were kind of like, they were papers that were looking at, kind of the cases where they're pursuing, Nazi war criminals. And it's kind of weird why they're even in there. I don't even know, really, to be honest with you, why all of them are in there, but there are some. And so my buddy was like, if you know where to look, you can find these. And, if you've been to the archives, which I think you have, it's not like going to the library and just being like, okay, I would like all your Cold War stuff. You have to kind of know what you're looking for and, kind of go in and say, this is what I'm looking for, and be really specific, almost like as a journalist filing a Freedom of Information Act, request. You have to really know, what you want to see and where you want to see it, and they'll get it for you, but it's not easy. So anyway, this friend of mine told me where to look. He hooked me up when I went there. He's like, okay, talk to this archivist. They'll help you. They know where this stuff is. And I spent, one glorious week, recording and, taking pictures of all these pages and reading it, of incredible stories that I had, I guess only really heard about, like secondhand, or, you read in not a novel, but in a biography of some spy telling their story. But then to like actually read the entire picture, get it from the, in the archives, was incredible.
I hope you're enjoying this episode. Next time, former naval officers and best-selling writing duo Bruns and Olson will be here to talk about their latest military thrillers.
You'd mentioned earlier, you asked us about crowdfunding. David talked a little bit about, having put together weapons of mass deception. There were a couple of things that we had to sort of overcome initially, and that was, he said, how do two, the real question is, how do two type A personality guys, both of whom are trained to lead from the same institution, put aside their egos long enough to sit down and write something creatively together, where the work is the number one thing, not the credit.
That's next time. March 25th is National Medal of Honor Day, and my new book, Immortal Valor, about the Black Medal of Honor recipients of World War II, is out now. The book chronicles these immortal heroes' life journeys through all the pain and struggle up until their ultimate triumph. I hope you check out Immortal Valor, which is on sale now as we celebrate all Medal of Honor recipients on March 25th. Now back to the conversation. You discovered their spycraft that they were doing in the 60s. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and that was, part of that was what sparked my interest for wanting to create the story. But there was, trying to figure out like how they process things. Like we've all seen TV shows or you've read novels, especially if you read John le Carre or things like that, like, people who actually, did it. So you kind of get this is somewhat of a picture of how they do things. But to read almost like a play-by-play breakdown, slow motion of this is how it goes, was fascinating to me. So, for example, one of the ones that caught my eye right off the bat was there was a particular Russian ambassador in Bonn, Germany, which at the time Bonn was kind of the epicenter of this spy world that was going on. Like the Germans still had their they had their a lot of their foreign relations stuff was taking place there. They're working with the US and the Russians. So that was kind of the place where everything was going down. And what would happen, what I read about was interesting, was how they were, the US or CIA would allocate funds toward, certain people coming over to Germany to work in Bonn. As Germany was kind of opening back up again, there was a lot of business opportunities. So the CIA started to recruit people. So one of them that really caught my eye and that I kind of based Ed Maddox off of was there was a Ford Motor Company executive who was moving to Bonn, and they recruited him to work, with the CIA and doing whatever they wanted to do. And part of the reason, it was twofold. One was they were, they weren't as suspect, I guess, by the Russians. But it's just a businessman moving there, and also they were able to move a lot more freely than if an ambassador or somebody that worked with the embassy was moving around the country. That could cause some red flags to go up. But a guy who's just helping Ford expand their company, they're not as suspicious. So I found this one guy, and that's kind of who I based Ed Maddox off of. There's a conglomerate, there's several different characters, but in particular him. But what he did was his job was basically to recruit for the CIA. So wherever he went, they're like, you're recruiting. So in this one story that I found, and mind you, this, and I don't know if your readers do, but the archives is more, it's kind of rote reading. It's a report. There's not really a narrative there. Occasionally you'll find somebody that knew how to write a little bit and wasn't just writing a government agency report, but they would write it in a little narrative style. And that was always fun to find. But with this story in particular, it was just basically almost like this play-by-play, like you're reading of like what they did. So what this particular guy did, and of course, I don't know his name because I never put his name, which I would love to see if I could find some of these people and interview them and like what it was like. That would be like the real, information tranche that I would get and be like really excited about. But anyway, this one particular guy, his job was to recruit. And so he went, when he was in Bonn, his first job was to recruit the maid, their cleaning lady or whatever, for a particular Russian ambassador who they suspected was part of the KGB. So they found this woman. Now, her husband had died in the war. She was a single mom. So it was all like, to me, like all aspects of how they recruited and who they recruited. Part of it was a little bit of luck, but also was like, hey, this is the person we need. Like, we can pay her. She'll be down with, going along with us because she needs money. She's scraping by, just everything. So they were paying her, I believe it was like $1,500 a month, which was huge money. Yeah, in the 60s. Huge amount of money. Because they had, one of the weird things about this, they had a breakdown, of the budgets. And some of them were redacted. This particular one wasn't. I don't know if it was a mistake, but I was like, holy cow, they're paying this woman a ton of money. So and basically what he was to do is recruit her, and they were depositing money into an account for her. And the only stipulation was whenever we ask you to do something, you have to do it. And they didn't tell her what, they didn't tell her when. And so it was a year and a half went on with this guy. And I don't know if they were trying to determine he's, or affirm that he was with the CIA or with the KGB or not, this Russian ambassador. But it took about 18 months. And then after 18 months, he went to her and he said, okay, this is the operation. And so what she did was she went, cleaned his house. And then when she got done, she was to take a hammer and break off the key in the lock when she was supposedly locking it on the way out and say the key's broken. Now, on the other hand, or at the same time, or while 18 months was going on, he also, this Ford Motor Company executive, also recruited a locksmith in the area. So, back then you called the local locksmith, whoever was closest. It wasn't like, you had your choice today of, the Yellow Pages or Google or whatever, it was just, this is the locksmith. And he was also on the payroll. So he comes over. When the ambassador gets home, he goes, oh my gosh, I can't get in. He sees the note from the maid. Immediately the ambassador contacts the locksmith and says, hey, can you help me get into my house? Something's, the key's broken off. He goes in, he makes a new key or rekeys the lock. And then, the next day hands a copy of the key to the CIA. They go in and bug the whole place. So it was this kind of like very slow moving, very meticulous, part of spycraft that I found very fascinating. And, something that I guess we don't really think about, or we don't hear a lot about when you're reading these stories or whatever, like what all goes into the planning that goes into it and everything having to fall into place for them to get that information. It was just to get information from this guy. Right. And I don't know who the ambassador was or anything like that, but it was all like, come together at the right time. And I don't know. I just thought it was really fascinating.
It does sound like methodical work. That's for sure. From the first book to the last in the series, how did you, in the character arc of Ed Maddox, how did he change? Did he become disillusioned? Did he become one of their great assets? How did you change him?
Well, I started out with him kind of as a more of a reticent character. Like, I don't know, do I really want to do this? Because I kind of try to put myself a lot of times in the character. Like, if I was the everyday man, coming to, I write a lot of, other genre or other stories too, or novels too, or series that have different types of characters. But in this particular one, I was like, if I was just like a regular guy, with a cool opportunity with my company to go live in Europe and work there at this really kind of like energizing time, in the world where, everybody's rebuilding and, there's peace, it's kind of like there's the sky's the limit on what you can do. And this guy has an opportunity to go. And then all of a sudden he's asked to be thrust back into something that maybe, he was like, I don't want to be a part of war or whatever, but maybe I can have a role in preventing this from happening again or whatever. So I kind of took him as more of a reticent, like, I don't know if I really want to do this. And the first book in the series takes place in the US, where they kind of vet him. In that story, that's called the very first book in that series is about that. The next book, To Catch a Spy, kind of takes place in where he's actually transitioned over into Germany, and that's where it takes place. But The King of Queens, the first one, is kind of more of a the backstory of how they vetted him and made sure that he was right, and has to kind of rat out a friend of his. It's kind of the story where or spy on a friend of his, determine what's going on. And then the next one is where he really gets into the thick of it, where he, over in Germany. But I wanted to make it, a story where, there is some where he does change over that time of going from reticent to really patriotic and, kind of bold. Like, he becomes emboldened as he goes, and he's not only, some of his missions are he's, stopping information, other ones where he's rescuing, like a scientist or, some other political dissident that he's, pulling out that has information, helping get them to safety, that he probably never thought of himself as a hero, but he becomes one, along each step of the way, kind of a more and more stronger hero in that series. So that's kind of the way that I wanted to take it, and would thought of it as if it was an everyday man who kind of found purpose in something more than just, selling advertising or doing marketing for a car in Germany at the time.
And you kind of take your readers along for the ride.
Yep.
Of his journey. Are there any books you're working on now, or any series you're planned?
Yeah, I've, that project was more of a labor of love for me than anything. It's selling Cold War spy novels from the 60s it's a little niche, but the readers, a lot of my readers still enjoyed that series, but primarily I've been writing kind of more modern day, Black Ops spy thrillers. So I have, the good fortune of being around some people and getting to know people who have, worked in special forces in the Army, in the Air Force, people who have been all over the world, doing, really a lot of covert stuff, and hearing their stories as much as they can tell me, as much as they're allowed to tell me, based on that. So, it's been a lot of fun that way, to kind of, develop series that way. So I have one character named Brady Hawk, who I wrote a 21 book series on that. Thought I was going to stop it. And, my feedback from readers were like, no, you have to keep going. So I kind of did a reboot on that series, which I feel like is even like enriched his character even more, which was a lot of fun. But those are more like kind of, a Black Ops group that works with the CIA, kind of under the radar, stopping some covert stuff. And then I have there's another character, Titus Black, who's a spinoff from the Brady Hawk series. That's a similar type of story. So those are the main ones I work on now. I also, my other labor of love story is historical, which I know, your listeners are into this kind of historical stuff. It's not as much military history, but there was a character named Richard Halliburton, who, if you've heard of Halliburton Gas and Oil, which we know about that, his father was one of the four Halliburton brothers at the time, of lesser known Memphis real estate fame. And Richard Halliburton, his dad wanted him to come back and work in the family business and sell real estate in Tennessee and in Western Tennessee. And he was like, nope, I want to go see the world. And he ended up, going all over the world. I describe him as more like a Bear Grylls of the 20s and 30s. He was very adventurous, first person to swim the Panama Canal and only an ever person to do that. Had people lined up in John boats behind him to shoot crocodiles if they tried to attack him. He swam in the Taj Mahal pools at night under the moonlight. First person to climb Mount Fujiyama in the winter. He was imprisoned on the Rock of Gibraltar. I mean, for, kind of breaking some of the protocol in the British military there. I mean, the guy was, he was crazy, all the stuff he did. But he ended up writing about it, his travels at a time when people couldn't travel during the Great Depression, and sold over 1 million copies of his books. So I started investigating him as a character and kind of writing stories. There were a lot of people that at the time that thought he was a spy as well, because back then a lot of, if you know a lot of the history, you know that there were a lot of writers that were spies in the or for the military, different governments and things like that back then. Well, he went missing in 1939, leaving on a Chinese junk boat to San Francisco. He was leaving from Japan, stopped in Japan to do some maintenance on this boat, and disappeared. So there are a lot of people at the time, because he was such a popular figure and there were rampant conspiracy theories, just like there are today, people thought that he was spying on the Japanese at the time for Roosevelt. So I took the story of what if he really was and tracked where he was in the world with his actual daily. I mean, we have a chart that tells us every day where he was in the world, and kind of mixed it with, fiction. Like, what if he was there and what if he was spying on somebody? So I worked with this German military expert, a British professor actually, who kind of the preeminent expert on German military between World War I and World War II, the Reichswar. And we worked together to kind of work with real historical characters there into a plot that would fit with Halliburton, trying to basically stop the Germans from working around the Treaty of Versailles and rebuilding their military eventually, so they go back to war, but not by conventional means of accumulating wealth. So that's kind of the story. It was a lot of fun, and that I did. So I guess it would have a little bit of some military stuff in there as well, because there is historical value to it. But it's more I would say it's more Indiana Jones than your typical military thriller type story.
That's what I was thinking. It sounded a lot like, and people certainly love that. That's for sure.
Yep.
We've been talking with author R.J. Patterson. His books are everywhere. Thanks for coming on the show.
Well, I appreciate it, Rob, and look forward to hopefully talking to you again sometime.
Absolutely. That's it for this episode. Thanks again for joining me. Next time, former naval officers and best-selling writing duo Bruns and Olson will be here to talk about their latest military thrillers.
You'd mentioned earlier, you asked us about crowdfunding. David talked a little bit about, having put together weapons of mass deception. There were a couple of things that we had to sort of overcome initially, and that was, he said, how do two, the real question is, how do two type A personality guys, both of whom are trained to lead from the same institution, put aside their egos long enough to sit down and write something creatively together, where the work is the number one thing, not the credit.
That's next time. And be sure to check out our Point of the Spear YouTube channel with bonus video material plus full military history documentaries. There's tons to explore, and I hope you check it out. I'm Robert Child, and this has been Point of the Spear.
Music licensed from audioblocks.com. Point of the Spear is produced by RSC Media Group.